Hello Orchid friends, how are you? Welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time watching my video, my channel is all about orchids. From what orchids I have, how I grow them, my thoughts on certain orchid topics, to what orchids in my collection are blooming, etc. So if you want to follow along my orchid hobby adventure, please consider subscribing to my channel and turn on the notification. What we have in this video today is one of my few Dendrobium orchids in my collection. This one is a small / miniature Dendrobium orchid, and it's a species. So this one is called Dendrobium trinervium. I hope I said it right. And this is a species, and that's why the name that you see here is a small case T. This orchid is so small that I didn't see it was getting ready to bloom until its first flower opened. And it was a surprise. It was a very nice surprise, right? End of May 2019, first flower opened, and that's when I discovered, oh my gosh, this orchid is in bloom. To be honest with you, leading up to that point, I wasn't even paying attention because the way that this orchid is and the way its flower is, right? It's primarily white, but then with some green color around its lip area. So it's just harder to see. And normally, if I don't pay attention, if I just water it, I miss it. And this time I really did. So it was a very nice surprise. This orchid, I believe it's a species in the regions of Thailand and Malaysia. And this orchid also has a free blooming characteristic. And what that means is it doesn't really have a specific season that it would only bloom in. It would just bloom a couple times throughout the year. And that is very true based on my experience with this orchid. This orchid was in bloom last year. I believe I have done at least one, maybe even two videos prior to this video. And at the time, it was a lot smaller. You can see here, there are some new growths that are in bloom in this video that was not even a thing in the previous two videos. This orchid really has grown quite a bit since I purchased it. This orchid is still in its original container and original media, which is bark chips. The reason I didn't repot it right away was because at the time I thought the bark was still looking pretty okay, and because this is already a small miniature orchid to begin with, I felt like it still had some more room to grow into or have a little bit more space. I don't really need to repot it just yet, because with Dendrobium, just like Phalaenopsis or Cattleya orchids, you really don't want to overpot the orchid. And so for this one, because it's so tiny, I did not want to run the risk of overpotting this orchid, because especially Dendrobium, it really needs to have well-drained, a good drainage, well-drained media. And it also needs a lot of ventilation and high humidity to do well. And this orchid has very, very skinny, tiny roots, even skinnier than the roots of my Oncidium twinkles. So this orchid, I eventually decided that I'm not going to repot it into a bigger container until it gets out of control, meaning, growing out of the pot or the media. And to increase the humidity, I decided that I will add a cup. So I grow this orchid inside of that plastic container, transparent plastic cup. I think it's a 12-ounce cup. And that cup also is used as a saucer to gather all the liquid water when I soak this orchid. And you may have already noticed that there is a metal wire from the bottom of the container and go all the way to the top. I did that because it's in a plastic cup, and I want to provide myself with an easy way to get this orchid out. And also another benefit is if I want to hang this orchid up for whatever reason, right? It could be that it's too wet, or humidity is too high, or I really just want it to get dry quicker. I simply hang it up. So it provides me with a lot of flexibility that way. I can hang it, I can even just, leave it in the cup. Either way works really well. I have done both, and this orchid seemed to like either way. But one thing I always make sure is that after I soak this orchid, I always dump out the water and then put this one back into the container, back into the plastic cup. But then maybe after a couple hours, I will come back again to make sure there is no more water residue or residual water at the bottom. I want to make sure that there is, if the bottom of the container is not having extra water. I don't want the bottom to be too moist or soggy. So that's what I do. And then with fertilizer, this one also received just 25% strength fertilizer, a quarter strength fertilizer, just like my other Phalaenopsis orchids, pretty much all other orchids, except a couple select ones that I'm trying with 50% concentration of fertilizer. And this one, at least once a month, I also soak it with just pure water, and that has worked pretty well. Speaking of the roots, the roots are so thin, but I noticed that with this Dendrobium, even though it gets dry and because it has thin roots, I noticed that the roots doesn't die as easily as as Oncidium roots. Because Oncidium, if they're dry, completely bone dry for too long, those roots can die. But with this one, I noticed that once I put water back in, some of them, even though have been dry for quite some time, green up. They actually turn a little bit like that pale green. So I know that it's still viable. So I think this is just something that's unique to this Dendrobium and its thin, skinny root. Now, every time I talk about Dendrobium, there's always someone who would then ask me, does this Dendrobium require winter rest? Yeah, I mean, Dendrobium and winter rest seems to always be, the topics and that get talked about together. Well, let me just give you the answer. No, this orchid does not require winter rest. This Dendrobium, just like Dendrobium Phalaenopsis type of Dendrobium, they don't need winter rest. There are other species and Dendrobium nobilis, for example, those like Parishii or regular Dendrobium nobili types, they do require winter rest. And this one remains green all year long. Even in wintertime, it would grow. It would put out new growth, so it's just free growing, free flowering. So this is actually a very hardy Dendrobium species, and for me it has been really, really low maintenance. I even put it at the bottom of my rack at my grow space, and it seems to do just fine. I mean, most people feel that Dendrobium needs to have bright light, and I think it's only receiving probably medium bright light. Because I give the brighter spots to other type of orchids that need even further more sunlight. So this one really is just a rewarding orchid without having to make too much effort for. And finally, I just want to talk about its fragrance. It doesn't have a very strong fragrance, but it has something. It smells like plum wine, plum juice to me. It has that sweet but then sour after smell. So it's actually pleasant. It's actually that very light, soft, sweet / sour smell. And I particularly love its greenish, yellowish green lip, and the whole white petal and sepal around it. It's just one of my favorite color combination. I mean, obviously I grow plants. Green is one of my favorite color, but then with white and green, a little bit of light yellow, it just makes this orchid look extra adorable, and for its size, I really absolutely adore this orchid. This is all I have for you today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you would like to get more orchid related videos from my channel, please subscribe and turn on the notification. I want to wish you happy growing, and I will talk to you in my next video. Ciao!